This is Dr. Tami Dean, and you are listening to the Equity Hour podcast. I am so excited to be here with you today. My goal is that as a listener, you leave with new ideas, resources, and actionable steps for your educational community. Let's explore how we can use our voices for equity and social justice today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Equity Hour with me, your host, Dr. Tami, and I am so excited. Today, we have Dr. Max Weinberg in the house. Hi, Max.
Hi, good to see you.
Thanks for joining us today, Max. Tell you all a little bit about Max. He is the founder of Belonging, LLC, and has spent more than 25 years in the education profession, serving as a teacher, trained special educator, coach, and administrator. Max's passion for belonging arises from his experiences as a student, parent, and professional, advocating for marginalized children. Ensuring that all children are seen and understood in schools is personal and professional. Max brings his background as a loss-affected youth, as a transracial adoptive parent, and as a trauma-informed educator and advocate to each situation he encounters. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. This is very cool.
I'm so excited. Okay, Max. So as my listeners know, and as you probably know, I start each episode about talking about each of my guests about their equity journey. And I do that because this is a journey. To me, it is a marathon. It is a consistent process of learning or unlearning. And so I feel like in the world, there's this idea that you can do one professional development, or you do this one thing, or you've been doing this X amount of years, and now all of a sudden you're a quote unquote expert. And in my opinion, you're never really an expert because there's always something to learn. So you may be very knowledgeable, you may be very experienced, but it may be in only certain aspects of equity and belonging and inclusion because there is so much intersectionality and nuance within it. So I would love, can you share a little bit? And I always say, when I have another guest who's been in this work as long as I have, the Cliff's Notes version. Tell us a little bit about your journey into this work.
Thank you for, thanks for having me. This is very, very cool. I've enjoyed listening to your podcast. And yes, I am on an equity journey. And in the scheme of things, because I'm a believer in how foundational childhood is, even though I feel like, and I want to say, and I take pride in saying that I got into education to work on equity or to make the world a better place, especially when it came to historically marginalized people. I'm really a beginner. There is still so much to learn. And I think that shows up in the layers, locally, and then if we just use the way we're set up, I live in a suburb, so big city, state, federally, and then just historically, 400 years or more of this mess being created, and more, right? More than 400, but right. and trying to understand and contextualize every single day, things were getting worse for so many and better for so few. Multiplied by, like I said, every day, and there's so much to learn, all to say. So I was raised in the suburbs of Chicago, white nuclear family, 1980s, a little queer kid, but could mask pretty well. When it came to safety, learned to keep my mouth shut about things, was pretty femme, but could hide it, or could hide behind my big sister, or this is a harder thing to talk about because I haven't really unpacked it, but being Jewish in a pretty non-Jewish community also gave me it both othered me, but also gave me a community to feel safe to hide in. That was white. That was all steeped in white supremacy too. So that's all been part of my journey of understanding how I had privilege there by being in a tight-knit white supremacist Jewish culture, but also being able to wave a flag of minoritization. I lost my sister. I already mentioned my sister, really, really, really close. Lost my sister, and that's where my kind of profound loss came. She was a or the primary attachment figure in my life. And she kind of like had paved the way, just the person she was, like punk rock, a kid living with cancer proudly, and all of the markers of having childhood cancer really proudly, in her own like teenage way, fighting the system of hospitalization for kids and like naming equity issues, like just because she was awesome and that was just what she saw. She was treated on the south side of Chicago, so at University of Chicago, where like racial disparities were on full display.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like those were in me, and then went to school and went to a school on the East Coast that I struggle to name currently, but I really had a great education. And their motto was truth even unto its innermost parts. And I wanted to be a journalist, and that really meant a lot to me. Truth even unto its innermost parts. Then I got to a school that had undergrad that had crazy racial disparities on display and was steeped in Zionism. And I kind of wondered what that meant. Truth even unto its innermost parts. Wanted to be a writer, wanted to be a journalist. Bunch of us moved to New York City together, and working in the publishing industry was not so fun, and lots of interesting sort of dynamics showing up there about socioeconomics and racial dynamics, who had a voice at the table, who was running the show. This was, 1999, and landed, yes, in Teach for America, which is a whole conversation for another time. I'm
Yes.
very thankful for the opportunities that many people in that organization gave me,
Mm-hmm.
and they supported me going to a really progressive child-centered master's program at Bank Street School of Education. And I was teaching in the South Bronx and eventually in Harlem. And I just say, like, my first day on the job in the South Bronx, I was given a class that was called the lowest, a tiered class,
Uh-huh.
fourth out of four. And I stood in front of them the first day, sort of using my nostalgia of what it meant to be a teacher. And I think I tried to lecture them for 8 hours, maybe the first week. And they showed me that was never going to happen. And they were sixth graders. They were adorable and beautiful and hilarious. And just like, they were magnetic. Like, I was just like, you are all amazing. And each one of you has the most amazing perspective on the world. And so that was just like, that was it. I was hooked. That was a blast. My mom is a career educator too. So like, I grew
Okay.
up in a house where we not just valued education from like a middle class white perspective, but also like what it meant to have great teachers who really got you and advocated for you, and what effective principals do. Like, that was very much just the topic of conversation at the dinner table.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always find it so interesting that they always give the students with the highest need to the least experienced
That was
educator.
me.
Like,
And
it just
the
holds
one,
true in this story too.
right, that was me. And the school, just to even go deeper with that, the school was known as like a failing school. It was in the South Bronx, the asthma capital of the world, in Hunts Point. And when I interviewed for the job, it was like one of these sit for 15 minutes, and the principal says, "We have a position. Do you want it? We really need someone." And I was like, yes, I absolutely do. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to save the world. It was a failing school on a street named um, Fail Street in the South Bronx. Oh, and when he interviewed me, he said, "You might know our neighborhood from the HBO. It was reality show, but I don't know if we had that name for it at the time. Probably just beginning with reality shows, docu-series, Hookers at the Point. You might know us from the show called Hookers at the Point." And I was like, I do know that show. And it was, the community was just so, so, so traumatized. It's had a tiny bit of revitalization.
Uh-huh.
And there always have been amazing community activists there. Um, but for a principal to tell me that that's how the school is known, just kind of put everything into perspective of like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is kind of a really strange way to set up your school and your perception of what the kids bring to the school too. So
Yeah, what you
my,
think about the community, right? And like that these students come to you from, right? Like what preconceived biases
right,
are you having if that is how you describe your school environment?
yeah. and there you will hear throughout this conversation, I'm very aware of it, and we can talk about it, but you'll hear me say things like this, like, how simple would it have been to have that street name changed? And so
Mm-hmm.
when I say how simple would that have been, I know that's all my privilege, right? Like, you just go. It's um, the Karen in me, right? Like, you just go, you fight for it, you ask for it, you demand it, and that street name gets changed in honor of the kids. And that's like a duality that I live with, and I tussle with it even at my dining room table with my kids. Of like, I know I have a lot of privilege to walk in there and say stuff, and it may or may not get done, but I feel that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And simultaneously, I want everyone to be able to do that. Like, I want those kids and parents to be able to say, "You're educating my child on a street called Fail Street. We must change that now. Like, it should be Excellence Street." And it was FAILE, to be fair, was named after someone. Um,
Right.
but like how simple would it have been to stop talking smack about the kids or the community and to advocate for real change for with a local representative or governing body?
Yeah. But, I think you bring up a really good point when we talk about different access to things or privilege that we may or may not have. Like, even though I'm from a marginalized community, like my education and experiences give me privileges, right? To know how to say or access. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you a story. Like, I was advocating for something that was happening in a school district. I was working in with the superintendent, and he's like, "Well, the other parents don't know. They don't know you." I said, "I know they don't know what I know, and that is why I am
Mm-hmm.
here, because
Mm-hmm.
this is
Mm-hmm.
not okay,
Yeah.
right?" And I say all that to say the important part is like, what do you do with that privilege? Like, you have privilege to go to the table.
Mm-hmm.
So who are we inviting to come with us
For sure.
to the table? Like, who are we opening the door for with the areas in which we know we have privilege for those that don't have that privilege, or
Yeah.
we have knowledge that they may not yet have that we can share and collaborate with?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing, and I know we'll talk about it, but like education as a protective fact, like I think we talk about education as being a protective factor for individuals, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not great at talking about it. Well, it's actually a protective factor for communities, and communities that thrive are get the education they deserve, and they're given permission, or they find ways to allow themselves to connect and
Mm-hmm.
activate with one another. And communities that value education are able to receive that activism too and have healthy discourse about it. So the protective factor is not just about the individual, but like entire societies are able to thrive when this happens.
Interested in learning more about equity coaching for you or your educators? Sign up for a free connection call with me, Dr. Tami, to discuss a personalized plan. The link is in the show notes. Yeah. Well, this just makes me think right now, like education as a whole to me, I mean, it's been under attack for a minute, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like public education is even more so under attack. So we're starting to remove the idea of community, like, and with the growth of charter schools, with the conversation around vouchers and
Yeah.
moving away. I mean, well, even the fact that public schools are funded based on property taxes, right?
Right. Right.
Um, there's just so many layers to the
Right.
complexity of what makes public education inequitable in this country, despite
Yeah.
how people want to think it is equitable.
Yeah. I think we're not. This is also a moment where like we're just getting into, and it is specific to my journey, a fast track program, alternative certification program, in and it happened to be in New York City. So seeing those people who were part of just like forming teacher corps rise through the ranks and end up where they are now, it really makes sense. Like I'm really upset, but not that surprised at where we are because I forget what she was called. My program director was someone who told me to keep my mouth shut and get back in the classroom. And she was so disappointed in me for raising issues of safety and child well-being at this first school I was at on Fail Street.
Mm-hmm.
Went on to run one of the biggest districts in New York City that oversaw education at Rikers Island, which was like the scariest thought for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
here was someone who was telling teachers to be quiet about physical abuse or mental distress at the very least at schools. And now she's running this, and then went on to have an even bigger position in Newark. And now I'm sure is like in regular conversation with really heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And you see this like all over the place. And it's, we know that every president has had their hand in every president in our lifetime has had
Mm-hmm.
their hand in um, the destruction of neighborhood public schools. It's really, really interesting. And I'm a huge fan of the Obamas, but we're right here in Chicago, the
Yeah.
Obama Center is going up. And there's been a school in Hyde Park, in the neighborhood they lived in the community they lived in, that is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful building, but it's seen huge divestment over the past few decades. Now the Obama Center is going up, and it's getting tons of attention, and as it always should have.
Yeah.
It's also in the shadows of the University of Chicago and the University of Chicago Lab School, which has put in like millions and millions of dollars. And so it's interesting, this conversation of like, we are able to find the resources when we know there is sort of a mutual benefit. Like, this school is going to get a lot of resources. It's going to be beautiful. Hopefully it becomes a school of choice. Everyone in the community wants to go there. Um, but why does it take a new internationally known museum or center to beef up a school for children? Like our it feels so backwards. Like, shouldn't the children be getting the best first, and then we build up from there?
I mean, yes, I'm gonna agree with you. I mean, I even just like we were like, oh, it's characterized as a failing school. Like even how that language has come about in my lifetime as an educator, like that wasn't a thing when I
Mm,
started teaching and working in education, and now that is all that people talk about, and it is sad to me for so many reasons, most of
mm,
which it is this testing era that isn't about anything but money.
mm,
It really isn't about what's best for kids. It really isn't about learning and excelling and improving our academics. And I know that because when you go and you see what educators and educational leaders are being asked to do, right? We're over assessing. Like you can't assess that much and then actually
right.
have any growth, right? Or it's removing critical thinking, right? Because these
Mm,
assessments to be easily scored have to be multiple choice. We've taken
right.
away like the writing assessment. We've taken away and it just, I don't even know where I'm going with this, except it just makes me sad. It makes me
Right.
sad for the state of education that we think we need to label schools as failing.
Yeah. And that it that when I describe my students, like, I those students my first year, we did the most fun stuff in the world. Like, we got involved in a neighborhood arts organization. We helped with greening the Bronx River. I really like used everything I had learned at summer camp,
Mhm.
like as a counselor going to camp, because it was clear that a very traditional approach to teaching and learning, even though I didn't know how to teach, really, it was clear like that wasn't going to work for
Yeah.
these guys. This was why they were for these kids. This is why they were in place where they were. We wrote to Sandra Cisneros. She came and visited she came to visit the school, give them the resources and the tools, and they were going to change the world, right? Like these are the minds that
Yes.
we say we want and we need. Um, Bill Gates's daughter, I keep seeing this over and over and over. It must be something about my algorithm. Bill Gates's daughter just created a shopping app. It like helps you shop. And I was like, so all of these thinkers who sent their kids to Montessori schools and said they never gave them devices, who got the best of the best of the best, are now creating shopping apps? Like, any one of my children in Hunts Point, in the Bronx, who understood how to see the world in the most complex ways, could kick the you know what out of that shopping app and
Yes.
change the world in all of their beautiful diversity. And I haven't even really talked explicitly about all of the diversity was there because I think their experiences, the story that was told about them, um, would even be so essentialized, right? And even like, this is the community that Jonathan Kozel would write about. I think it was Daisy, and like I love him and I love his heart. But the way those books are used, even in teacher education programs,
Yeah.
right? It's a very essentializing way of looking at schools. And I haven't, when I get to my story, eventually being a principal of a neighborhood school in Evanston, Illinois,
Hmm.
a zip code that is supposed to shoot you
Yeah.
to Stanford. It was like in leading a very segregated school, sort of 25% Black, most of the students low socioeconomic. I don't love that term. I'm not using the right term, but 75% white and wealthier. I knew which kids could think outside of the box, and I knew which kids were going to change the world, and I knew which kids, and it's not only one group or the other, but I knew which kids were just sort of like treading water to keep up with the exact path that their parents created for them or wanted for them or thought they bought for them by buying into the zip code. It's like
Yeah.
that's not the type of change we say we want. And when I say we want, I say you hear that from any politician. We need to build 21st century skills, and we need to build it. It's like, do we, or are we just looking to fund billionaires' trust funds?
Well, yeah, or do we, or are we willing to do what it takes to build that? Like, I had so much hope we would come out of COVID and like realize like what
Right,
we were doing was so broken, because I firmly believe children are creative. They think outside the box. They notice things we don't notice. And how we've shifted education over the last 2 decades, really, it sucks that life out of them.
right,
We want them to all be the same. And we're seeing the results of that now. And then we're like, oh, why are they like this? What do you mean they can't think for themselves? Because we've educated them not to. We've educated them to fit inside this box or only do these things. And
right.
society needs all kinds of diversity of thought, of ideas, of ways of being. We're taking away kids access to art and humanities, and and then you wonder why people don't understand what's happening with our government right now because we
Hmm.
weren't teaching social studies.
Hmm.
Like it
That's
all
right,
has
though.
an impact.
I think about that all the time because some of my work is in teacher coaching and teacher development, and I know that's your background. Um, the 21 and 22, well, 25-year-old, 26-year-old teachers are No Child Left Behind students. So,
Yeah.
right, not only did they not get trained on effective science and social studies, like applied math and science teaching and learning, they themselves did not go to schools where they got that. And so many of them had their arts programs cut. Even and I say this even in suburban schools. Like I spent time,
Mhm.
I said a school leader in Evanston, and to get teachers to teach science and social studies daily was an uphill battle. And even every permission in the world, like take them out to the forest preserve. I'd rather you do that than teach, what Houghton Mifflin says needs to be taught. And challenging. And, I say this with love for teachers, but also like it is hard to teach in a way you've never experienced yourself, unless you've had a lot of professional development and like exposure.
Yeah. Well, and as a former like teacher educator, right? I definitely saw that in my time there. Like I could see when they started to come
Uh,
to the college classroom. And what we were saying is, best practice. And then what happens when they go then and have to go into a school district where it's not the same, right?
mhm,
There's not an alignment because we're now moving toward a scripted curriculum. And I
mhm.
know people are on attack too of teacher ed programs saying, right, they're not doing X, Y, or Z, which I firmly disagree with because a lot of those people saying that aren't actually doing real research. But
Mhm,
that's a
mhm.
whole nother conversation, right? But I think what it does is we just have the blind leading the blind a little bit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so even if we open it up, have we given them the tools to be able to access that?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen an increase in, you know, non-traditional teachers coming. Some of that is great and wonderful, depending on how they were supported in coming to the classroom. Some of them, they're not so supported, right? Depending on your state and your regulations, and they're just kind of like thrown in there. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
this idea, and this is just my personal thought, right? Everyone thinks they can be an educator. Going back to kind of what you said, like I've been taught, like, because I've experienced teachers,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
now know how to teach, which
Mm-hmm.
those aren't necessarily, they're not the same thing.
Right.
It is a profession, is a highly specialized profession
Mm-hmm.
that historically doesn't get the respect because it, let's be honest, right, has been traditionally a female profession and role. I mean, you go
Mm-hmm.
back to original teachers, you couldn't be married, right? You couldn't be
Mm-hmm.
seen
Mm-hmm.
outside,
Mm-hmm.
after a certain time because, oh, scandal, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so all of that influences how, like, and I think when you talk about like the history, right? All of this influences where we are in society today. And I think that's really important for people to know because if you don't know the
Mm-hmm.
history, you can't understand where we are today or like how
Mm-hmm.
history might be actually repeated.
Yeah. I think the worry is, like even when you're talking about like the pioneer school days, like even that structure, like who was plucked, and I'm saying this while also recognizing patriarchy and anti-womanist views, but like we also there was a humanity piece lost, right? Like so I'm working on a book right now on school belonging, and so much of what I'm pushing is best practice and best lowercase b best, but like really what I mean is humane practice. Yes, it's trauma informed. Yes, it's social emotional responsive. Yes, I hope I do justice with cultural competence, but it is like sit down and listen, talk, explain how you went from A to B to C to D, and don't assume that someone else's brain is going to do it the same way.
Mm,
Like sort of like what do we foundationally believe should be happening when we are in a, I know this is a loaded word, but a transactional education moment. But like if I am hired to do a job, then standing up and pushing I ready math is actually not the job I was hired to do. But even giving school districts all the benefits of the doubt, when I look at my job description, it's not all written about iReady.
right.
It's written about in behind it ethically in loco parentis, like I am there for the child when their parent cannot be. I commit to keeping the child safe. Yes, I am absolutely committed to lesson planning or whatever language is used for that. And underneath that is like I'm there to dignify the children's experience. And this can easily, or the child's brain, the child's experience, the child's potential, all of those things. I get into some sticky water, and I did as a principal too, when it comes to teacher social emotional well being, like what schools promise for teachers.
Hmm.
That's a much, much, much more nuanced conversation. I think nuanced is a fair way to say it. Conversation for me, from my perspective, and when I think about student belonging. Um, but that piece of like how did we get to a place where we stop listening and affirming whoever that child is in whatever shape they show up. I
Mm.
do a little bit of work advocating for parents with students with disabilities, and the amount of right now the place we're in when you go to the table for an IEP meeting or special education, it just feels so tense. And
Yes.
my take on it is so anti-disability, it's so ableist, but like fervently anti-disability. I may have been guilty of this 10 or 15 years ago. Like I'm assuming that parents are coming to rig the system, to lie about their children, and that's the feeling you get sometimes. And it's like, wait a minute, let's slow down here and remember again we're talking about children,
Yeah.
and we do have an ethical development to an ethical commitment to support them. And how did we get to a place that says whatever Pearson is pushing out and selling on the stock market is more important to deliver than a child's experience. Like that is so, I thought we did away with that when, well, I don't know. I can't say anything now because politically, clearly, we have not done away with that. I was listening to, there was a big Google decision this morning, and I was listening to NPR say Google has been Google has been very worried about how it was going to be treated by the courts today. And you want to pause and be like, dear NPR, I love you. Google was not worried. Google does not have feelings. The billionaires, millions who have invested in Google may have been worried, but we're going to be
Yeah.
okay. And
Right.
who's really worried is like, we could go on and on about at this very moment, a newcomer to Chicago, LA, or DC is very, very worried. like let's really talk about where we should be putting our attention.
Yeah. I mean, that is such a good point, right? Like there's been applying human characteristics
Thank you. Yes.
to companies, and they don't have feelings. They don't like
Mhm.
any of those things. I do want to you talk a little bit about your experience and then a little bit about the work you do. So you founded Belonging Education.
Mhm.
So please share with us like how you decided to build a company and what is it you do out here supporting belonging in school districts.
Yeah. I'm sort of an infant business still. Belonging grew out of my dissertation. I researched effective practices to support adopted and looked after kids. So I'm a transracial adoptive parent and have supported a lot of kids who are in all types of care situations as a teacher and as a principal. Adopted and looked after kids in foster care, kids in kinship. I use looked after. It was a term used in the UK, or it still is, for kids who really were in foster situations or kinship care. But I use it because it's such a nice umbrella term for anyone who's been in temporary care, even if it's informal care. Hey, I need my friend to help out with my kids because I'm going through it. So I say looked after because a lot of the experiences, where it shows up sort of emotionally and lived experiences with being moved around for kids and having challenges to attachment, often are the same, whether you're adopted or looked after, even for kids who are adopted at birth.
Mm-hmm.
The challenges that they work through are really, really similar. So my dissertation was on strengthening school belonging for adopted and looked after kids, and I didn't want to let it go. I'm now a school leadership coach, and a lot of my work, um, you walk around schools, and granted, I was a little bit of a hammer looking for a nail. Like, you walk around schools, you listen, you start to see, like, wait a minute, I hear you talking about this one child who their dad is not changing, they're not fitting in, and this is probably every single school. And the more I started hearing that, I was like, well, I got to do something with this research because I believe in it. I was
Yeah.
fascinated by what came out of it. And so I started belonging. And there are certain parts of this belonging framework that grew out of my research that are applicable to all kids, or to kind of Gloria Latson billings, like that's just good teaching.
Yeah.
And then there's some that is really about justice and equity and centering populations who have historically been marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the schools that I work with directly, um, that's not true. One school I work with directly, it is about voices who have historically been marginalized.
Okay.
And one school, it is much more holistic, like that's just good teaching. But with the other school, we are really, with the that's just good teaching, we are really focusing on beefing up paraprofessional
Oh. Mm-hmm.
knowledge, ability, skill, because which feels like good, meaningful, like justice
Yeah.
oriented work. Because the principals, like I give them so much credit, realized that they really had more bandwidth to spare as far as investing with their paraprofessionals, and knew that they were worth investing in, and that kids deserved to have all of their teachers totally aligned, no matter sort of status or where they were coming from.
Yeah. I think paraprofessionals are an often overlooked group in the educational
Mm-hmm.
system, but they are
Mm-hmm.
vital.
Mm-hmm.
To
Angels. I mean,
vital.
and I think parents, we're in a little bit of like, parents are getting all information from all sorts of places about schools and education, but I think parents understand better than school leaders how vital paraprofessionals are. Like they
Yeah.
really champion, and I think we've missed that. We have misunderstood that too. Like, why is this parent so close, or why does this parent want to talk so desperately to this paraprofessional? And I think school leaders, I might have been, I have to think back, but I was probably guilty of this sometimes. Like, no, we've got to get them to talk to the teacher, and there's a hierarchy here, and that just hurts the kid, and it's really undignifying for the skilled paraprofessionals. Like, I
Yeah.
recently put up something on my social media, like there are no unskilled workers. Like, let's stop that phrase. We might be
Yes.
really bad at training people. That might be our fault. But like, paraprofessionals come in with like a whole lot of knowledge and a passion for supporting and educating kids.
Yeah. Well, and to me, the reason the parent wants to talk to the paraprofessional is because the paraprofessional like knows
Mm-hmm.
their child,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I always say, like, if something makes you feel uncomfortable, you gotta like look back and reflect on yourself. Like, why is that making you uncomfortable? Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
upset that this parent is going to this paraprofessional? And it's probably because they know something that you should probably know. And whether or not
Mm-hmm.
you're ready to admit that to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's true. And or how do you foster a collaborative partnership with your paraprofessional to gain some of the knowledge that they have about your students? Because it is very real.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes teachers have 30 students that, they have a large number of students. So if you have this additional layer of support in
Mm-hmm.
your space to help you get to know students better
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little bit differently because of the access they have,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Let's use that, right? Going back to what you said about what is best for kids.
We also it's been interesting to watch. I was mostly an elementary person, but having high schoolers of my own and working with some high schoolers, it's really interesting to see how we do or don't live out our commitment to career and technical education, because that's also a striking thing of like how, I know this is mostly an adult podcast, so I think I could say like how shit upon some members of a school community
Uh-huh.
are, while we're also saying we so support career and technical education. So everyone knows who I'm talking about, right? We're talking about the lunch workers, the recess workers, the clerk, the bus driver, the custodial staff, like the ways that, masters and PhD level educators can, again, I'm sure I was guilty of this, so I'm both pointing fingers and owning it. The way we can kind of prioritize what we think is being the most important work of schools,
Yeah.
while ignoring that, like, our kids are picking up on all of these messages, and they might be the most kick-ass any one of these positions, and we need them. Like, we need them to be, actually. So um,
Yes.
we lose that in the I think in all, in all parts of school conversations. There are no committees. If right now I'm working with about 15 schools in various capacities, there are zero committees that support all of the people in a building. And I would even go so far as to say even schools that have social committees tend to leave out recess workers, clerks, like the people who are
Mm-hmm.
really making things run for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Yeah.
know I'm jumping around a little bit.
Oh no, you're fine. Max, this is how my brain works. But okay, this is what I always tell people, right? Like this is how your brain works. I used to talk about this all the time when I worked with preparing pre-service teachers or doing graduate level courses with teachers. I would say, they'd be like, "Oh, I can't, have my kids do group work, or I can't, whatever," because they start having these conversations. And I was like, "What do you think you all do?" Like you all do it all the time. I said, but it is actually a natural human way. Like someone says something, it makes you think of something, it connects to something else. eventually it does circle back around. Sometimes you may need a little redirect with the, the
Hmm.
student group and even the adult student group. Uh, but
Hmm.
that is how our brains work because that is how we connect and remember things. So, yes, it seems like it's all over, but really it's not. It's all
Right.
related to the experience of what we're talking about. And I always hope
Right.
educators remember this because it is my biggest soapbox to stop expecting things from children that we cannot do as an adult.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
there are so many of those, some
Hmm.
of which is like sitting perfectly still or like not moving, right? Or not like you all do all these things, pay attention in your next professional development session. Are you not
Hmm.
ever looking at your phone? I bet you do. Like,
Yeah.
um, not saying we shouldn't have expectations, but like let's make them realistic, right? Like a first grader can't sit for 45 minutes still on a rug or
Yeah.
like
I
they
just before we got on, I was working with a teacher for, let's say, a child I care very much about who has an educational plan.
yeah.
And the plan guarantees that she get time and a half on assignments based on learning profile. And we reminded the teacher, and the teacher came back and said, okay, like I'm willing to do that, which, this should not be up for debate because it's a legal document,
Right.
504 IEP, 504. And the teacher came back and said, I'm willing to do this as long as the child makes the most out of the class time that I give. And I had the same reaction you're talking about, like, you know, I train adults for a living. Like the amount of breaks we have to build in, the amount of time we have to allow for just catching up or meandering. Um, and, the question of like, are we running a factory or are we running a school? Like, if anyone thinks differently, as everyone does, then
Hmm.
sitting still for 85 minutes for a topic that's totally new every day and just cramming it in your brain, you're not going to get what you expect to get. What you might get is a lot of kids who are just compliant and could just sit and make it look like they're working or, fiddling with the paper. But um, that's not how deep, long-term, meaningful thinking and learning works. Like you're going to
Right.
turn kids off. Um, and I think the fear when I get that back from teachers is like, so there's a federal law that protects the child about this,
Yeah.
like, and this is how you're perceiving of your job. And I'm not blaming the individual teacher. I'm saying what in that system is telling that teacher that this is the right way to center childhood at this like such a formative time. We're talking about high school, early high school, freshman,
Hmm.
at such a formative time of life. Um,
Yeah.
kids really, really, really get put through the ringer with traditional schooling right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And they need advocates. I talk about all the time about, use your voice, right? This goes back to like when you're in spaces of privilege. Like if you see something like that, people aren't trying to follow 504s. They are, they're trying to talk about setting up systems that aren't best for kids because really that is why we're in education, right? We're in education to support children.
Hmm.
And if you're in education and you don't want to support children, you might need to have some reflection time and think about that because that is really what the job is. The job is about supporting and providing the best environment for kids to grow and be successful adults out in society, right? Like it's like parenting, right? Like your job as a parent is to help build individual, independent people
Hmm.
that are able to go off into the world. Well, in locus parentis, that is the mirroring of
Hmm.
what the educational system is supposed to do. Um, okay, so we've talked about so many things and I love it. And I always every episode there's like we could have three other episodes about other things that we did
Yeah,
things
and loco
that
parentis is definitely the undersung. It is not getting enough airtime in current lexicon or current conversations around school. Like there are all sorts of reasons for it, I think, but that is like we have to bring teachers back to that. A social worker recently asked me, "What's the code of ethics for educators?" And I was like, "There are many." And I kind of went to like union contracts have them. There are a lot floating around. I was like, but honestly, I really think it's in loco parentis.
Mhm.
Like we don't have the same one as social workers have, which is beautiful and lengthy and rich and guided by all sorts of things. We have a lot of school law, but I was like, actually, it's in loco parentis. Kids are spending more, we know this. It's been this way for a long time. Kids spend more time at school. We know this because, holy smokes, school shooting. Like, we know this. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, so yeah, yes, yes. So,
You're like, yes, yes. Okay. So, um, I like to kind of bring things together, um, with like a tip to listeners. I know we could pull from a lot of different things, but what is like the one thing you want people to walk away as they're doing this journey? What is something you think that they could take on and do?
I want this to sound really positive. I want this to sound like hopeful. Um, but I do want to, I'm going to just sort of like frame it a little bit. There's been a conversation for a while now. I think um, it was starting before COVID about joy in schools. In my kids' district, the phrase, this came up through a corporate model of educating in Chicago called the J factor. And the J factor was every lesson plan should have, it was sort of like a hook or something that really stimulates the kids.
Yeah.
Um, in our district, it's become just sort of like shorthand for like, kids come to school and have fun. And like with many things, my argument is there's no joy without belonging.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that is something that like I really would love really anyone who works with kids, traditional school or not, to think about. Sometimes we create systems of what we call joy or experiences that we might think as joyful, playing a brain break on a YouTube video, having a whole school assembly where they're playing like Price is Right types of games. And those might pep rally. Those might be joyful for some. Those might have like a collective feeling of joy.
Hmm.
But if you just stand in a corner and look around, it's really not that hard to see how many people might be sort of either externally or internally withdrawing from experiences like that, which I think then we can extrapolate into like the educational experience. Um, so my push and my ask is for educators to like, yes, find the joy, but first seek out ways to help kids belong in schools through authentic connection.
Mm.
And if I back it up even more, I would say adults showing deep real curiosity, sometimes longer than they feel comfortable doing. So I'm going to ask why you're telling me this story right now, and I'm going to love every minute of it, even if I'm busy.
Yeah.
Um, can back up, can be like the driveway into belongingness for a lot of kids. I don't think we have to talk about we don't have to diagnose kids with things like avoidant attachment or attachment issues if we as a system are actually pouring into helping them belong.
Mm.
It doubles the burden on kids. So that's sort of the one thing I wish and ask for. And I think going back to how you introed me, which I really appreciated, like that is a through line, both as a kid and even as someone balding with gray hair as I go to school. It's like, if you had just taken 30 extra seconds, then that kid might not have just withdrawn or,
Yeah.
gotten really upset.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful um thing to ask, and I think it's really important for people to remember like we're the adults in the situation and we should be holding the ownership, and too often that ownership gets transferred to the students or the children,
Mm-hmm.
and it shouldn't be. So I think I'm going to even ask you to take a pause, right? When you feel like you're going to be pushing some blame onto a child. And is that a bias coming up before you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, act on it? Because sometimes that is. It may be an untapped recognition of bias, and
Mm-hmm.
again, as I've said many times, y'all, bias is a part of human nature. It's
Mm-hmm.
what you do with when you start to recognize it that, will really make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Max, for joining us
Thank you, Dr.
today.
Tami Dean.
Listeners, I will put a link to Belonging Education in the show notes so you can check it out and check out Max's service. And eventually, when his book comes out, you can get a hold of
Looking
that.
for July 26th from Rutledge.
Okay. Yes. Less than a year away. Oh, that's so exciting. That is so exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening again today. Go ahead and check out the show notes. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to use your voice today. This wraps up another episode of the Equity Hour podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Make sure to check out the show notes for any resources, links, and next steps from today's episode. Head on over to Instagram and give us a follow at Dragonfly Rising LLC for more tips, resources, and opportunities to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, intent is not enough. Action is necessary. How will you use your voice today?